Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing For the Love of Art and the Making by Beyond Twilight.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So looking at the names of the tracks on this album, there's two ways of looking at it. The first one being calling them by their section numbers, so being section 1, section 2 and so on. And there are also the official names for the songs. Now the way I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna call them by their official name and in brackets put their section number on the side. And with that being said, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So this is Beyond Twilight's third studio released back in 2006, and as of now this is their last album. So a quick backstory about the band Beyond Twilight. They actually started off as the reincarnation of the Danish band Twilight, and they released their first album which gained a pretty popular success, and thus they've been able to sign their label with Massacre Records, and under that label they released all three of their albums. Now unfortunately band member changes happened all the time with this one, to the point where each album actually has a different vocalist on it, and seeing as the last vocalist quit after the third album, a fourth album would have meant that they needed a new vocalist. So the band decided to take a different approach and just take a long hiatus and not make music, and that's where we are today. The band technically did not disband, but it's highly unlikely that they will release any more albums anytime soon. Now the album we are reviewing today is definitely one of the most interesting albums that I've seen so far when it comes to the conceptual idea of it. You might be surprised at first seeing that this album actually has 43 tracks on it, and the most surprising thing about it, the runtime of this album is only 38 minutes. Now the conceptual idea of this album is actually the fact that this album has one track which is divided into 43 sections, and that one track is the same title as the album, being For the Love of Art and the Making. Now there's two ways of listening to this album. The first one is the simplest one, is listen to it in order from track 1 all the way to track 43. But the second option is also quite interesting, and that's basically the concept of this album. You can also listen to this one on shuffle. That means the sections, they're all shuffled, and thus creating a new experience every single time you listen to this. Now, as is my obligation to this series, I gave this album firstly the proper listen, and I listened to it from track 1 until track 43 and had a pretty interesting experience doing so. But in order for trying new things and doing some trial and error, I also gave the shuffling a chance and did about 7-8 tracks like that, and I have to say that it didn't really work out for me. The first and I think the most major flaw in that way of listening to this album is the fact that there is no continuity. Now what I'm basically saying is that a lot of the songs don't really end off in silence. They usually end off with a few notes that start off the next section, but when you're shuffling this album through, it doesn't really work because the next section might start off with some piano notes, but it then shuffles to another section which starts off with something completely different. And this could have been easily avoidable if they just had made it so that each section ends off in a very, calm way or in a pause, so it would all have been solved, but they didn't do that, and I don't know how that's supposed to work when the concept of the album is the fact that it can remain continuous if you just shuffle it through. Now, the second flaw that I find with this one is the fact that this album really is inconsistent. You see, it's also present on the regular way of listening to this album, but here it's just more amplified. The fact is, there's nothing to bond with. Everything is so changing so quickly that there's no real thing that you can say that is a repeating motive. Everything is just basically, common metal tropes that are repeated all throughout this album. There is some addition of classical music and other different things, but honestly there's no point in this album which I can say, yeah, this is memorable, or yeah, I like this, I want to listen to it again. So yeah, when listening to this one, I just found myself in this very pretentious progressive metal project. This one goes to try and combine metal music with progressive music and classical music into one piece, which is actually 43 pieces, and honestly, they're all pretty forgettable. And before getting into this album, I was reading about it and trying to realize what this album was all about, and I understood from reading what's the concept of this one, and I was thinking to myself, this is pretty cool, and I still think that. I just think that Beyond Twilight were not able to deliver that coolness into that really cool idea, but maybe one day some other artist can do that way better. Things that I did like about this album, though, there are a couple of things. The first one being the raw production quality on the instruments on here. For some reason I like the way that everything really sounds raw, as if it's recorded without a lot of post-production intervention, and I like that very, very much. It gives a nice aesthetic to the album. And the second thing that I like about this album is the incorporation of classical music. I specifically like the way that they incorporated some pieces of Fugue in D minor into section 36, and specifically into my favorite section being section 35, the way that they kind of remixed some parts of Hungarian Rhapsody number 2 to make this unique section, which really is a fun one to listen to. But honestly, there is not more than I can say about this album. It's very interesting. A lot of people praise it for being, very genuine and very, interactive in some way, and most albums are not. But honestly, I find this album to be a far cry from greatness, and to have a nice conceptual album, but not a so great execution. But yeah, I would recommend this one just because of the interesting idea, but honestly, you might like it more than I do, but I don't find this one to be all that interesting. So yeah, I like this cover, but not too much. I think the colors on here are very nuanced, and that's something very nice. And I also like the imagery, the person with the robe holding something on fire. It looks to me like a dead shrub, like that thing from the biblical Moses story. But honestly, it also looks like one of those plague doctor masks, from the bubonic plagues, so that's also pretty cool. But other than that, besides being a pretty average metal cover, I don't really see a lot of interesting things in it. But I think it does the job for an album like this, although with a conceptual idea like this one, I think they could have done a better job at getting that idea through the cover as well. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I think this album gets a very simple 6 out of 10. But yeah, that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow, because tomorrow is gonna be our 100th episode on this series, and we're gonna listen to an album which I've been longing to listen to for a while now. Of course, it's gonna be the debut album by the band Yes, simply titled Yes. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day. I'll catch you all tomorrow in our special 100th episode. But until then, I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.